Hi, everyone. I thank you all for joining me. I'm just going to give everyone a couple of minutes to join. I know I've got a couple of people that are running late. So we'll just give it a couple of minutes and then I'll kick off. Great. So I'm going to get started. Thanks again for joining the webinar. This is my first webinar, so if I fumble through it, then don't blame me. I'm sure they'll get better with time. So why are we doing this webinar? Well, I guess some of you I might know and some of you I might have met in person. And a big question that comes up whenever I'm meeting with brands or with other vendors or also just chatting internally to my team here is a question that always comes up is why are brands using 3D to get to market faster? A bit of kind of background on me. Let me just go over here to where my slides are. There we go. So yeah, a little bit of background on me if you don't already know me and you haven't already heard my life story. I actually studied fashion design. I worked in couture fashion straight out of college. And then I moved into more and more technical products over the years. So I've done luggage and bulletproof body armor. And then I gradually moved closer and closer into sportswear and outdoor. I've been working in I had been working in the kind of fashion industry for about 15 years. And then at the start of last year, I moved over to Foundry. They approached me to work on some 3D applications, specifically for 3D footwear design. And who's Foundry? So Foundry has been around for about 2 decades now. They're primarily a visual effects company, and that's where they have a lot of their heritage. So in applications like Nuke, which is the standard for film compositing in the industry. We work on every film from Star Wars, Star Wars to, gosh, every love romance film, TV shows, Netflix and Game of Thrones and all that kind of thing. Almost every TV commercial that you see at the moment is using our software to create special effects. So I guess in addition to the special effects side of it, we also take that special effects and bring it into the world of product visualization. And that's where I kind of come into it, and that's where this discussion kind of comes into it. So a number of years ago, we started working with a bunch of footwear brands just on different kinds of solutions for either modeling shoes or for visualizing shoes in their organization, in different parts of their organization. And from that, we've expanded and we've kind of reached out to most brands now, and we work with almost all of the footwear brands, all of the big footwear brands out there at the moment. So in the last 12 months, I've been traveling all around the world, and you've probably had the the fortune of listening to me at an event or seeing me in your office at some stage, and thank you very much for your hospitality and your ears. So we've really kind of seen the landscape of what's happening in the industry, in all different parts of the industry, and the problems that people are trying to face. And there are some similarities in those problems, but there are also some very big differences as well. One thing that came out of all of that travel was this expectation that people knew what 3D was. And I touched on this last week at the FDRA conference in Long Beach, that we used to kind of turn up to brands. I guess about 2 years ago, we would show up, and the brand would have a pretty clear idea of the application they wanted to use. They'd say, I want to use Modo, or I want to use Roman's Cat, or I want to use Rhino, or something like that. And they would kind of charge in there with, this is exactly what we want to do. And then the conversation would transition to well, what can I do with a 3D, and what can I do with those applications? But what became really apparent was that there was still a bit of a knowledge gap, and people weren't actually sure what 3D was and what it meant for them. So those initial conversations were kind of like, what does Modo do, and how long will it take for me to learn, and can I use my Rhino files from the factory? And then it kind of turned into, where's the AR button, and can I script colorway to upload variations to my PLM? But actually, a lot of the knowledge gap was actually around what is 3D, what is AR and VR. One of the questions I was asked was like, how do I put the 3D inside the computer? And it really kind of made us take a step back and consider the education process around 3D, and that it needs to be refined a little bit, and that this is a journey for a lot of people, and we need to kind of take them on that journey as well. So, last week at the FDRA, I just kind of really briefly touched on what is 3D. It's essentially the X, Y, and Z axes. So if X and Y are your 2D axes, X, Y, and Z are your 3D axes. But different industries refer to 3D in lots and lots of different ways. So there's AR and VR and XR and MR and 2.5D, and there's renders and animation and turntables. So there's lots of different language being tossed around. And I think everyone's trying to get their head around what those different things mean. And something we get asked a lot, and especially when internally brands are trying to kind of pitch their ideas or their workflows into their executive teams, is why 3D now? And I'm definitely have been a 2D designer for many years. In fashion college, they didn't teach any kind of computer part. It was illustration. My illustration teacher was the lead illustration teacher for Gianni Versace. So I had like a really elaborate illustration style. I learned Adobe Illustrator on the job. But I think this chart really shows us that in kind of the late 90s, there was a peak of everyone wanting to be a graphic designer. And there's this massive hype around, we all need to get on board with graphic design. And there was a kind of competition between CorelDRAW, if anyone remembers that. A lot of the PLMs decided that they were going to introduce their own CAD tools, which was like such a great idea. And then we had this pit of disillusionment where everyone was like, well, I can't see the return on investment in 2D illustration in fashion design. I get it in graphic design, but it just isn't working for me. And then out of that, we saw Adobe as the winner for 2D design. We saw an increase in productivity. And now we're getting to a stage where we have pretty good productivity out of 2D illustrations in Adobe Illustrator. And we have things like connectivity to our PLM systems. We have plugins that do a whole bunch of stuff that we really enjoy as well. And then for 3D, we haven't had such an early introduction into kind of this photorealistic 3D side, but recently in kind of like 2014, 2013, and probably still up to today a little bit, there's been a lot of hype about 3D. And instead of it being, Adobe and CorelDRAW, it's around, is it CAD? Is it polygonal? Is it free sketching? Is it NURBS? Like, what is it? And now I feel like we're entering this, or we've just entered this kind of pit of disillusionment where everyone's like, holy crap, I'm saturated in 3D. I don't know which one to choose. And I guess people are saying, like, why? Why am I saturated in this, like, in 3D right now? Like, what is actually happening that's creating this kind of curve, and how can I get to that productivity that I've seen in 2D that will benefit me. So what we actually have seen in the general workforce is this convergence of technologies. So in the consumer interface, you have things like photorealism. So you have the ability to actually create photorealistic assets in 3D and with photorealistic materials. And that's becoming quite an intimate process for a lot of designers at the moment. And it's really escalated in the last number of years with increases in speed in creating 3D models, but also the increase in speed of creating 3D materials and things like Substance coming along for the ride with that as well. CG and visual effects in cinema and TV have become like super prevalent. Almost everything has CG and visual effects. Even if you think it doesn't, it absolutely does. Cloud computing and cloud storage is really important. 3D printing, AR, and 360-degree video. All of those things have been coming to kind of a precipice at the same time. And you're seeing that, AR is becoming accessible for like billions of people suddenly because, Apple's really pushed that. And 3D printing, like now that we know machines can kind of do whatever we want to be able to control that. So just to explain some of those things and where they kind of sit in the spectrum of, why 3D now. So photorealistic, and this is like an image courtesy of New Balance, beautiful image, not an easy image to make, but this is photorealistic 3D, and this is when you can't tell whether an image or a video is a photo or a 3D render. So things like reflections and refractions and imperfections are kind of important there, and that kind of too perfect surfaces, they tend to look really fake. The challenge with photorealism at the moment is that you can't have it in real time. So you can't have this kind of real-time rendering, which is real-time rendering is, I guess, what you would expect if you're in an augmented reality environment, if you're in a game, or if you're in a virtual reality environment. And to get into real-time, you have to really simplify a lot of those materials. But every year it's getting much, much better. So every year at, conferences like SIGGRAPH or whatever, NVIDIA and AMD, they announce their big leaps and bounds. All the time Apple's launching, their new hardware and stuff to support these technologies, because the ultimate goal is to have this photorealism in 3D at all times. And here at Foundry, we obviously invest a lot in that as well, specifically for Modo and colorway. So I guess when you think about real-time next to ray traced rendering, so real-time is what you see in like Sketchfab. It's where the textures are kind of baked down so that you get a pretty great result, but you don't have that same photorealism of the light bouncing off every single fiber of the material or every single imperfection in the in the leather you see on the shoe here. I hope that's loading super smoothly for everyone, because I know internet connections can suck at times. Also accessible AR, which I mentioned before. I know Pokemon Go kind of makes everyone roll their eyes and it makes them a little bit sick, but actually what it did very quickly was introduce a lot of people to the idea of working in a 3D space, of interacting in a 3D space and having 3D graphics superimposed over essentially a 2D representation of your own 3D world. So it was really actually quite important, specifically for the middle classes who had access to these devices and were able to consider these technologies in their workflows. And then practical AR, things like, if anyone's used the IKEA app for AR, which is, pretty fantastic. I've used the Dulax app to paint my walls in my house, which ended up not being successful, but that was my color choice. That was not the app. We're going to see a lot of this kind of practical AR start to be distributed by the major brands in the coming months and in the coming years as well, and just finding much more interesting solutions than just placing objects on things. So that's really pushed this, why 3D now as well. And then if you remember, if anyone remembers Facebook, if you remember on Facebook, when people suddenly started having 360-degree images, and for some reason every brand had a 360-degree image, which seemed like a gimmick at the time, and yeah, I guess it probably was. But actually what it did was it also introduced people to the idea of considering the spaces around them and considering what exists around objects and around themselves. And I don't think we can discount that idea as being, you know, impactful over a period of time. It does kind of build up over time. Visual effects and computer-generated images. So they don't just, you know, exist in crazy sci-fi and action films. They're in every advertisement. You know, every person in every film and TV show and advertisement is in some ways computer-generated these days as well. And then cloud and cloud computer power. So, you know, all those different acronyms that I'm not going to lie, I don't know what they all mean. But getting access to really powerful GPUs and CPUs have come, you know, leaps and bounds. So my laptop now is pretty powerful. It's not top of the line, and I can run a 3D application. But also I can store all of that information in the cloud, and I don't need to have it on my laptop. So I can kind of start working on a 3D shoe on my laptop at work, and then I can drop it onto Google Drive and pick it up back at home. It doesn't need to exist, you know, on my desktop. So the introduction of that has allowed us to share big files much easier, and it's allowed us to consume big data much easier as well. 3D printing. So I love the idea of 3D printing. I do not think it's a fantastic solution at the moment in the studio, but I'm always happy to be challenged on that. I just feel like having a 6-pound block of nylon in a meeting doesn't add the value that I want it to. But I think that some brands have really successfully pushed that forward. You know, especially everyone knows of the Futurecraft project at Adidas with carbon. And I think there's going to be a lot more interesting stuff coming out of 3D as well. But that introduction, again, it feeds into the why 3D has become really prevalent now. And so why the focus on footwear design? It's like, well, why us? We're just like happy little footwear designers being lovely and designing cool stuff. So I would say 3D is not new for other industries. 3D has been around for a long time. But what's happening at the moment is really interesting, where footwear designers are starting to become the new graphic designers. So if you remember when graphic designers were the coolest thing ever, and apologies, graphic designers, like, you're still cool, but maybe just not that cool anymore. That has actually shifted to footwear designers. Everyone wants to be a footwear designer, and they've become really celebritized. So, you know, I guess Tinker Hatfield, you know, started that trend, but it's really become amplified in the last, at least the last couple of years, and certainly this year as well. So I guess, you know, I've been a designer before. Everyone in a brand thinks the designers are rock stars. I think mainly because they don't know what they do, and they think that they just kind of flaunt into the office and throw their bag on the table, a little bit like Whichever Wears Prada, and they kind of own the shop, so they're kind of terrified of them. But designers, I don't think we can forget that the designers are the starting point of the process. They really are a key driver for creating, you know, a beautiful 3D pipeline within your organization, and having them on board is really, really important. So how are brands using 3D, and how is it like being introduced, and in what parts of organizations are people adapting to a 3D pipeline? So again, I guess if we go back to this diagram where we've got this kind of dip of disillusionment, and we're just kind of starting to come out of that now. That disillusionment created failure. So we saw a lot of brands in not just footwear, in a lot of different industries, try a bunch of different things and expecting this huge company-wide digital transformation. And they wanted like speed and magic and, you know, fantasy and all this kind of thing. But I don't think we had reached that time when it was a convergence of all those technologies to give them the perspective to look back and start to make real change and real drive towards return on investment. And creating a cross-functional environment where kind of 2D could exist with 3D, or they could transition into 3D. You know, it wasn't possible because there were so many huge knowledge gaps and so much resistance as well. So we've realized that knowledge gap, and, you know, our goal is to provide, you know, a more holistic approach. So I guess in the different areas of the company where they're being introduced, you have obviously the iterative design process. So this is the designers, the color and material designers, all those different design functions interacting with 3D, internal line reviews, supply chain communication, so liaising with your factories, archiving. May not have thought of that, but actually creating a digital archive of all of your assets. You can only imagine it saves a lot of space. It also means that assets are accessible for a number of years, or for indefinitely, really. Retail buy-in, so selling to wholesalers or retailers with those digital assets. Visual merchandising, so we work with a couple of different brands on virtual reality store mock-ups. E-commerce solutions, once you've got something in 3D, you don't need to photograph it. And then virtual assets, which I'll touch on at the end, which is like my kind of super exciting thing that I like to talk about at the moment. So iterative design, I guess this is, the designer being able to take their idea and model something that looks photoreal, that they can kind of sell into people, sell into their other designers in their design team, sell into their design manager, and sell into the merchandisers and that sort of thing. So, once you've got a 3D model, you can do things like smooth animations and videos, and or you can render flat images. And what's become really interesting in iterative design in 3D modeling in the last kind of 2 years is a focus on these 4 sections that we like to talk about. And these are like procedural modeling, where you have non-destructive workflows. So this isn't about like undoing a bunch of things. This is about taking something out and slotting it back in. And we also have specific focus on tools for those operations. So if you're making shoes, you're not going into a 3D app and thinking, you know what, I'm going to have to create all these stitches from scratch. So we've developed a whole bunch of tools specific to the footwear workflow. There's a whole bunch of stitching tools currently in 12.2, and there's lacing tools which are coming out in February next year, which can save hours or days of time. Displacement mapping for simpler base styles, where you're doing things like perforations and embossed patterns. So that's a fantastic workflow for definitely for people that are doing lots of heels and dress shoes. And then finally, mesh fusion. So I guess everyone's really aware of the focus on tooling shapes becoming really important. So your midsoles shape and perforations or whatever, materials and everything. There's been a shift of focus away from uppers and to modeling the tooling and giving that modeling to the designers as well. So with mesh fusion, being able to kind of slap things together and the meld together really quickly has become a fantastic tool in that iterative design process. For internal line reviews, so again, passing those beautiful renders over to your merchandisers in an internal line review, it really gives them the control to make a confident decision. So the conversation between the designer and the merchandiser or the buyer is crystal clear. No one's making an assumption that this model that we're seeing here, that piece of plastic where the Metcon is, that's glossy. We're not having to assume that black is a matte black. We can see it perfectly. And then taking that into an application, like colorway, and being able to get people to drag and drop colors onto different things while still in a photorealistic setting has become really important as well. So this is something, I shared online this week. It was what I did on the way to the FDRA conference, but it's this, ability to create 100 variations really quickly in like 15 minutes and have those linked together and interact with each other. Interacting with your factories. So I guess, Southeast Asia is the manufacturing powerhouse, and the prevalence of email was no coincidence. So being able to communicate with your factories via email meant that they could receive information much, much faster. But I still see crappy samples coming back from the factory because they're still trying to interpret 2D CADs, and they're doing the best that they can with those 2D CADs. When we have a 3D photorealistic model, there's really no area for interpretation. The factory can come back and sort of say, this is technically not possible, but there's a visual marker there so that they can say, well, it's technically not possible, but I can completely see what you're trying to achieve here with your materials, with your structure and shape, and with the proportions. Specifically the proportions, they become really, really important. Also, I really love that quote that I've had for like oh my God, so many years. Whenever you try to sample something, the factory's like, oh, we only have this color available in the market. And for many years, I was like, where the hell is this market? And why can't I just go there and choose the colors that I've got? I guess having something in 3D, you don't need that that response of going and getting, you know, the available color from the market. You can do kind of whatever you want. Archiving is an interesting one that's come about for us. We've been working with a couple of brands now on creating archiving solutions. A lot of brands want to access their historical archives for design iteration stages, and having a catalog, a digital catalog available to designers and other people within the organization. So we've been able to create some kind of semi-automated metadata tagging so that people don't need to go looking for very specific things and know where to find them, that they can kind of search for things by color, by shape, and applying, you know, over time some machine learning algorithms to that so that they will auto tag themselves. But archiving is an unusual one, which probably you wouldn't suspect that, a fantastic thing that comes out of the 3D process, but a really valuable one. And then retail buy-in, once you've got a 3D asset, viewing that 3D asset in different lights. So setting up different lighting situations. And I hope they've come through correctly on everyone's screens, because I know that the top left one is very, very poorly lit, which is definitely the intention. So once you've got a model in 3D, being able to view it in different lighting situations. So here's this product in Walmart. Here's this product in Foot Locker. Here's what it's going to look like in our studio. Here's what it's going to look like in another studio by the window. You know, we did a really nice mock-up recently of a pair of headphones in a store window, which was lit by LED, but had a street light, which was like one of those ye olde street lights in London. And like the interesting light reflections off that product made it look completely different to what it looked like in the studio. The color was completely different. And the buyer at the time was just like, well, that's not the color that I want to appear in the store. So they could make a discussion, they could create a discussion with their visual merchandising team, whether they wanted to alter the lights in the store or whether they wanted to alter the color of the product. Onto visual merchandising, VR is already being utilized by, you know, some big brands to avoid creating physical store mock-ups, which I know some other brands do. And in VR, we've seen some really, really interesting stuff where once you're in the VR space, you can kind of walk around a store and see that objects are in your way, or you can see the clash of colors, or you can see the clash of objects and their displays as well. So it's a really fantastic experience for the visual merchandiser without having the cost of setting something up. In e-commerce, once you have a model in 3D, it negates the need for traditional photography. So, you know, once you've got control of a 3D virtual asset, it just becomes an extension of the designer's workflow to hand it over into marketing. And I really like that statistic that that came out last week, which I'll share the details of the report, but I can't think of it off the top of my head now. But it said that even if a customer purchases in a physical store, 80% of those purchases were digitally influenced. So they were influenced by social media, by the website, by however else you're creating customer touch points digitally. They're still affecting those physical store sales more than you can imagine. And so those digital touch points become really, really important. And the value of creating the most intimate experience is really, really important. And then finally, virtual assets. So this is the stuff that I'm super excited about at the moment that, you know, you can't share too much about. And the work that we're doing at the moment isn't for Fortnite, but I'm just using that as an example. And I stole that from Google Images, so don't sue me. But the focus, you know, for brands has always been on manufacturing physical products. So let's get the lowest price from the factory. Let's get the cheapest factory with the best quality. The factory's got to have capacity because we need to get those shoes to Los Angeles or wherever to put in the store so somebody can buy it or so that we can ship around the world. But I really like the idea of what if the product never needs to be manufactured? So what if the manufacturing is just the design? So once you've got a 3D asset, you can sell it to a gamer that's playing, you know, a game like Fortnite. They can put it on their character and they might buy them for $20 and you've just made $19.95 because it didn't take you that much to make that in 3D or to offer that, you know, custom pair in the 3D game. Also, as you start to see the introduction of the Oculus VR experiences at Facebook and other ways that we're interacting with each other and creating avatars, whether it's the kind of emoticons on your Apple device, or you've got your Snapchat filters or whatever, being able to buy apparel and shoes with the brand on it for a cost is going to become a massive, massive business for a lot of the bigger brands, a lot of people that are getting on board with this, quite soon. So that brings me to, I guess, the single asset pipeline, which is a really nice journey that we like to explain to people. So I guess it's taking all of those different elements that I just mentioned and putting them into this idea of once it's created by the designer in the design stage, it stays in 3D and then it gets spat out into lots of different areas of the business. And I think that's really important because when we consider the return on investment in a 3D pipeline, everyone focuses on, well, how is it going to save the designer time and money? How is the designer going to give me return on investment? But actually what we see is the return on investment tends to come from all of those different touch points. The designer is only the initiator of that process. And it's important not to dwell too much on the designer providing all of the ROI there. You really need to have a connected asset journey for that. Our goal is to be a digital product creation partner and drive that single asset pipeline. We've moved away from this idea of, you buy a seat of Modo and you will learn 3D and be a superstar, to it's a journey, and we're happy to educate people and be on that journey now. So that's me in one breath. I hope that was useful and that kind of explained a bit of why this introduction to 3D, this 3D market for footwear designers has kind of come out of the blue. I'm opening it up to questions now, and if no one asks me anything, I will be super sad. But also, I have some pre-questions that people sent me who said they couldn't be here. So yeah, please feel free to type in your questions. I'm happy to answer them, and I will I will take a sip of water while I'm waiting. Okay, so obviously I'm super sad. No questions coming through. So I'm going to kick it off with a question that I was asked about this webinar, and was I going to talk about why would you choose Modo over Rhino, over SolidWorks, over Romans CAD? And I think it's the million-dollar question that everyone asks. And I don't think that it's about choosing one solution. I'm not of the mindset that you need to get rid of Rhino or get rid of SolidWorks or whatever else you have. I think they're part of the solution, and I think they're part of this journey that, this 3D journey that everyone's on. I think each of those applications have their benefits. They also have their negatives as well. And it's just finding the place that works in your pipeline. Another thing I get asked a lot is, does Modo create patterns? So can I flatten out my model and make paper patterns that my factory can cut and do all that sort of thing with? The answer is yes and no. So it's not an easy thing to do. And to be honest, it's not something that we originally planned for. It's something that's come out of a lot of discussions with people using Modo for footwear. And there are ways to do it, but there are solutions that are intimate that we provide specifically for brands as well. Another question I get asked is, can I 3D print from Modo? Yes, you can. There are ways to essentially bake the geometry on that object and create a solid object and print it out there. definitely for people using Mesh Fusion for tooling. We get a lot of people creating tooling and printing it out overnight. And then finally, I get asked, can I create animations? Yes, animations are hella easy, especially if you have a template to just pull a shoe out, put a shoe in, and play a turntable. If anyone else shows me an exploding shoe animation, I'm going to cry. I just hate seeing them. I've seen them for so many years now. Okay, I've got some questions here. It's just my chat thing wasn't working, so my colleague Manya has run in with some questions. Where is the best place to sell characters? I'm always curious of expanding what I sell online. I don't think there is a best place at the moment. I feel like that market, so that avatar market, is still being developed at the moment. I know that the Oculus team at Facebook have started offering them for free for experiences in their VR, but I'm not sure who's going to own the store space. I'm probably speaking out of turn if someone in our own company is trying to do that, but I don't think they are. What do we have details on the stitching and lacing tools? Yes, for stitching, there's been a lot of stitching conversations at the moment around Modo, and something that we you see in the community forums, especially with the incredible William Vaughan, who is constantly posting and never sleeping. He's already presented some of the stitching tools for Modo 12.2. Otherwise, in Modo 12.2, which comes out on the 15th of November, there is stitching tools embedded in the application. And then for the lacing tools, I can't tell you any more than I've just told you. Otherwise, the product manager for Modo will kill me. And that's due to come out in April next year. But it's as simple as deciding where your eyelets are and lacing up your shoe. It's an automated process that we're super excited about. I've got lots of questions here now, so that's super exciting. How separated is the design for the 3D model? So that's an interesting question. How separated is the design process from the 3D model generation process? Are the two roles working together, or is it the same role? I've seen both. I've seen organizations where 2D designers have successfully transitioned into 3D. I've seen organizations where 2D designers have found their sweet spot in 3D. So whether it's picking up sketching, picking up, some interesting point of the 3D process and not all of it. And I've also seen organizations where designers sit alongside 3D designers and essentially work as a team. And what happens there is you tend to see a replacement of the developer role, because the actual specification process can be somewhat automated. And having been a technical developer myself, that does obviously scare the shit out of me. But it's also really exciting that is almost entirely a visualization process that's connected to a database now. Next question. Oops. Is a product, is there an artist try to model characters? Okay, is Modo based on product design generally, or is there any artist to try, or is it for any artist to try to create models and characters and creatures for games and stuff like that? Actually, Modo is definitely not just based around product design. It's just a happy outcome that kind of came from users wanting a solution to an artist-friendly workflow for the design process. Modo is actually, majority used for creating characters and creatures for games and visual effects. So absolutely, there are probably way more tutorials online for creating creatures. And I know there's a bunch of fantastic community contributors in the Modo space that can help you there. So I think jump on the community pages. Also, there's a free trial of Modo, and I think during the trial process, they give you a bunch of kind of prompts for that sort of thing. How do I find people to train in Modo in the US, on the East Coast? Yeah, so I think if you're in an organization, just email design@foundry.com, and the team there will connect you with either someone from our team or someone else that we would recommend. In addition to our services of training, we've also started working with Pencil on teaching different 3D elements there. So teaching footwear designers how to go straight from, how to essentially start their process in 3D. And I like that some people are responding to other people's questions. That saves me a lot of time. Yes, yeah. So I guess if you've got the CAD file, that's thank you for everyone for replying to each other's questions. But if you've got CAD files, Modo is super neat at digesting CAD files and making them usable for your visualization purposes. So, we know that every factory in China is going to have your tooling set up in Rhino, and that means that we don't really want you to have to start all over again. So by natively, Modo will support Rhino 3DM files being brought into the application. And then as you get more sophisticated and into some of the more complicated CAD files, there's a whole bunch of CAD plugin tools which will converse, which will essentially translate those into the Modo application. Cool. The model to create flat patterns. Yes, there are ways, if you're working in handbags, to reverse engineer the model to create flat patterns. We do that with a number of brands. It is quite technical because it depends on what output you want from that file. But it is something that, again, that's really something that the guys can talk to you about if you email design@foundry.com. They will talk you through what solutions we offer there. I'm not going to answer that one. Yeah, can you design print repeats in Modo? Absolutely. It's just a tiling function inside of Modo. And you can also do that in colorway and a bunch of different applications. There's a huge number of solutions for creating repeats inside different applications, but specifically in Modo. I'm going to have to wrap it up there. I hope I answered everyone's questions. I think no one asked me about my beautiful bald face, but that's fine. If you have any more questions, please email me design@foundry.com. That's design@foundry.com. The video will be available after this call, so if you want to share that with anybody, you can go ahead and do that, or download it, or whatever the interweb gets you these days. And yeah, I hope to speak to you soon. We'll be having another webinar in a month, and yeah, take care. Enjoy your day.